Hello, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to this discussion on measurement scales. What I would like to do is I'd like to play a game with you. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what I call some yes examples, and then I'm also going to share with you some no examples. And as we go progressing through these examples, what I'd like for you to figure out is what the yes examples have in common that is not true for any of the no examples. And so for the first two examples in this set, we have yes examples are age in years and height in centimeters. The no examples are sex, female, male, and race, ethnicity, white, black, Hispanic, other. And so if you just look at those two examples, you might be forming in your mind kind of an idea of what exactly it is that we're getting at. Let me add some more examples to these lists, and I want you to continue to refine your definition as I go along. You might think one thing and then you're like, oh, maybe that's not specifically it. Maybe I need to modify that a little. And so the next thing I'd like to add here is birth weight. So infant birth weight, and that's in grams. My next no example is happiness. And that could be low, moderate, and high. So if earlier on you were thinking that over here these went from low to high and these didn't, now we do have an example of something that goes from low to high. So you would have to kind of continue refining your definition as we go along. My next example is BMI. And BMI is measured in kilograms per meter squared. So that's my next example. My example of a no is a pain scale. And that's from 0 to 5. So a lot of times you've seen the pain scale, maybe the happy face, all the way down to the very, very sad crying face. Or it could just be a pain scale 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rank your pain from least to worst. 5 being the worst pain you could ever imagine, and 0 being no pain at all. So if you were imagining over here that the yeses were related to numbers and the nos were not related to numbers, they were more related to words or letters, then you would have to continue to refine what it is that you're thinking is this common thing that the yeses have. Let me give you a couple of more examples of yeses, and this might help as you're thinking through. Family income in dollars. Also fasting blood sugar. Oops. Writing too fast. Milligrams per deciliter. And so if you were thinking that this had to be on an individual level, that's not quite it. Some of these are on the individual level also. If you were thinking that it had to only measure one thing at a time, that's not quite it. So hopefully by now, though, you have noticed over here on the left-hand side that we always have something in parentheses that goes along what some people would call a mathematical scale from low to high, and that the intervals are equally spaced. So if I went, for example, in years, if I went from 10 to 11 years, that's not an 11, there we go, 10 to 11, that amount of difference going from one to the next is the same as going from 14 to 15, or from changing from 48 to 49, or so on. And so that really is what I was getting at, hopefully, as you were following along my example, that was getting clearer and clearer as I gave you more and more examples. The reason that that's not true over here is, let's think about happiness. To go from low to moderate happiness might be the same amount of change as going from moderate to high happiness. And the reason for that is that often the kinds of things over here in this no category are more subjective. They may be things that can't be measured with a tape measure or a ruler or a scale or a blood um, uh, evaluation machine. And so they're the kinds of things that might be like on this pain scale from 0 to 5, even though these are numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I need to pick what my pain is currently. Am I a 0 or a 1 or a 3? It may not be the same amount of difference that goes from one to the next. So all of these things over here in the yes category have equal intervals. My pencil, I'm writing too fast, sorry about that. And all of these over here on the right side do not have equal intervals. In fact, some of them we can't even put in order. We could reorganize race, ethnicity. We could start with other and then do Hispanic and then white, black, or start with black and then Hispanic and then other and then white. So those can't even be put in a specific order. So the thing that I want you to take away from this first discussion about measurement scales is this. On the left-hand side, we have something that we call scale. Remember how I said that you're going to be learning some definitions that are a common language or a shared understanding. So scale is one of those words that means a specific thing. Some people call this continuous. And both of those words do have some issues with them. They are often used interchangeably, and I think that's fine. I'll be using them relatively interchangeably. There are other words that also can mean the same sort of thing. I'm going to have to scroll up here a little bit. So one of them is a quantitative variable. And it's important to include the word variable at the end here, and you'll see why as we get farther into the quarter. There's also quantitative research methods. Quantitative can mean a lot of different things. It can be used to describe a variety of things. Some people will use the word here numeric. I think that is such a problematic word because it can be deceptive that I generally advise people not to use it, but I include it in the list because I think other people out in public health are going to use it, and you need to understand what they mean by it. By numeric, they mean there's a number that goes along a specific scale, and here's my scale, and here are all my intervals, and they're spaced out equally. All of these numbers are adjacent to each other. So that's what they really meant by numeric. But the problem with that is some other things are also numbers. My pain scale is numbers. Rate your pain on a scale of 0 to 5. And so some people might confuse it with that. So I would encourage you not to use numeric, but if you see it, then you'll understand what other people mean by that. Some other words are interval and ratio. These are two types of scale or continuous variables. The distinction between them is almost never important when we're doing statistics. We would make the same graph for an interval or a ratio variable. We would use the same descriptive statistics or perform the same kind of statistical inferential test. And so I don't make a distinction between them. Very rarely have I even ever seen questions on them because, especially in public health, the difference between them is almost irrelevant. It's more of kind of like a mathematical mental exercise. If you're curious, the difference is that ratio has an inherent 0 or a 0 point, a null point, and interval doesn't. The best example of interval is temperature, like temperature in centigrade, whereas 0 does not mean absence of heat. So if you see the words interval or ratio, just know that all of these things really are trying to get at the same concept where we have equal intervals between the adjacent values. Over here on the right side, that's just not true. And so we are going to be looking at variables that are called categorical. And what you'll notice up here is often we have categories that people would fall into. You would take a single person and they would fall into one bin or another bin, one group or another group. Obviously, when we get to race ethnicity, often people identify with more than one race ethnicity, and so we'll have this added category of multi so that they can have their category. Sometimes we have specific combinations that are really important, and so we might identify those. In terms of happiness, low, moderate, or high, someone would have to choose those. And even if in the data set we categorize low equals 1, moderate equals 2, high equals 3, there are still those 3 categories. And so what we're really getting at over here is the categories. Even on the pain scale, we're calling each one of these a category that somebody would fall into. And so I'm going to be calling those categorical variables because category is this inherently understandable concept that I think is helpful to a lot of people. But this type of variable can also be called something else. It can be called qualitative variable. And again, this distinction, this quantitative and qualitative, you'll see there are other ways in public health that those words are used. As a variable type, qualitative means that we're really just saying a quality about a person rather than something that's measured in a quantity. I have this quantity of years, or I have this quantity of height, or birth weight, or BMI, whatever that is. So it's a quality about a person that really puts them into categories. I don't think that's as good a term just because it can be confused with qualitative research methods and that sort of thing. But if you hear it, it's not wrong. And a lot of times you'll see that in questions. So just pay really close attention to what follows it. Is it a qualitative variable or a qualitative research method? Also, sometimes people just call these plain old groups. That's a very easy concept to understand. And so the groups are, I fall into the group of female, I fall into the group of high happiness, I fall into the pain scale group of 0. So it's really a way of grouping things, putting them into categories. So these two sides really, we're gonna be focusing on the way that quantitative versus qualitative are different from each other, and I prefer the terms categorical and scale or continuous. And I'll kind of use those interchangeably, and just know that people out in the public health field also will do that, and so learning all of those terms is really, really helpful. Thank you for joining me, and we'll have a more advanced discussion on this topic of measurement scales.